looked in the garden, I talked to the snake. I picked the apple, got hooked on the stick. But I found paradise, the Eden of my dreams. My eyes are shining like a serpentine chain. I totally surrender my heart, my soul, my brain. And love wraps around me like a serpentine chain. Like a serpentine chain. Like a serpentine chain. I fell for a charmer and I creamed like a fire. I picked the poison, ripped the skull and bone.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's your boy Dog Waters, and I'm back with one of the most prolific, insightful Dogman encounters that I've heard in a long time. Now, you guys know I don't do a lot of recorded interviews, and the reason why I don't do a lot of recorded interviews is because in most cases I do not want my witnesses to go through the criticism and critique of a bunch of goddamn retards. But it takes a strong-minded person for me to do an interview. And I found one of those people strong-minded. He's not afraid, and I know his personality can handle anything that comes his way. And when I find people like that, I'm very comfortable with interviewing them. Outside of that, it takes a little bit of nerve and a set of kahunas to tell your story and deal with that comes with it. Without further ado, let's get started on this interview. And I'm telling you guys, it's very insightful, and you guys will understand very soon. Are you there with me, brother? How you feeling today?
Feeling good, James. How you doing?
Oh man, I'm fantastic. Let's start by you telling the audience whatever you're comfortable with sharing about yourself: nickname, name, occupation. And for the record, guys, I'm going to actually do this story along with the interview. So YouTube will probably get the story before they get the interview, but members of the website will get both. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're comfortable sharing. You don't have to jump out the window and tell nobody your address, anything like that, because people know it's credibility over here. They know I'm not lying. So go for it.
Sure. My nickname is KP. I work in oil near the Sabine River.
Right. You live right there near the hot spots. So we're doing this story in remembrance of your father and the lessons that your father taught you, which are very freaking important lessons. And it's important to have a dad in our lives anyway, because men make men. You know what I'm saying? A lot of moms, I love your moms, your good guys are straight, but you can't make a man. So let's start off talking a little bit about your dad, because what you shared with me about your father made me understand that not only was he a real live woodsman, like a throwback who understood being in the woods, but at the same time, he understood the things that go bump in the night. Am I correct with that?
No doubt. He was a very experienced woodsman. There's a lot of hunters in the world, but there's different levels of hunters. I would say he was more of a slayer. He didn't hunt out of stands. He stalked. He was an excellent tracker. He could tell you movements, time frames. Pretty amazing. A lot of that was taught to him by his grandfather, my great-grandfather, Henry, who was Comanche Indian. So he was very experienced in that. And my family has deep roots in cattle and animal husbandry, taking care of cattle, horses, working the land. My family goes back all the way to the Sons of the Republic of Texas. They were some of the first people in Texas before Texas was even a republic. Some of the founders of Orange, Texas. Long line of cattlemen and woodsmen in my family. My father had a lot of knowledge in that area.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. When we first talked and you started telling me about your bloodline, your father, I distinctly remember you talking about how your father taught you to be able to literally stalk through the woods. And because most hunters sit in a tree stand and take a shot. It's a whole nother world when you're actually literally tracking an animal and you're ghosting through the woods, not leaving a scent, not making noise. It's a whole, I don't know, I'm the one other person who actually knows how to do that. That's like old school. And that guy, his bloodline is Native American as well, and that really is a tradition that's passed down through the bloodline. Again, I'm sorry for the
Now,
loss
I
of.
can't do it. He
Oh, you
taught
can't.
me, but I can't do it. He could. I know what he did, and I was taught how to do it, but I never mastered it like him.
Wow, I thought you had picked up on a lot of it, but you don't know how to do it the way he does
Oh,
it.
I did. No way. No way.
It's definitely something that's passed down through Native American bloodlines because the other guy, he's tribal. You wouldn't looking at him, you wouldn't think he's tribal, but he's tribal, and that boy will sneak through the woods. It's terrifying the stuff that guy can do. It really is. It's a lost art.
Right.
It really is a lost art. All right, so let's get
It
started
is.
going into the Dogman encounter. Let's start with what your dad taught you, and let's just start with your dad and what he experienced, and let's walk all the way through what happened and how it ended.
Okay. I had a pretty large ranch. I had, I don't know, 50 or 60 head of cattle. And I believe I know it was after the ice storm in the 90s. I guess that ice storm was in 97 or something like that. But you know how whenever there's a big event, you always say, you talk about that event for a couple of years. So I think it may have been the season after that ice storm. It started with, I look back on it and I noticed there was a lot of signs that it didn't register, but our property is about 4 miles, I guess, 7 miles if you drive it. But if you cut across the Sabine River, there's a lot of water on our property, and there's a pipeline that runs through our property. So that's like a highway for deer and most all animals. So we had a large population of deer and animals crossing our property always. And I guess the first thing I noticed is that the traffic went down to nothing. There was no tracks. And I'm talking about beaten paths where the deer were traveling. And the traffic went down to nothing. And I would always tell my father, I would say, boy, that ice storm really messed us up. And he just would shake his head no and not really say. He wasn't a man of a lot of words. But he really wouldn't say much about it. First that happened. Then I guess it was on a Friday evening. Yeah, it was on a Friday. It was on a weekend because I remember when I went out there, I could hear the Delta Downs Casino's not far away, and I could hear the announcements of the races going on. I got a call from a neighbor stating that one of the horses was out. So I got my dog and took off out there. I had a cow dog that would work horses, cows, whatever, help me. And I got out there, and when I pulled up, the horse was outside the fence looking straight across the pasture all the way to the back. And the way the pasture's set up is there's, I guess, 100 acres is pretty clear, like just real nice pasture, and there's a couple of ponds on it. And then there's like a ravine that runs north and south across the property. Now, the pipeline runs east and west down the middle, but this ravine runs across and it drains all the properties around there. That's where all the water goes out and it heads down to the river. There was nothing in there. Once you cross that ravine, there's thick woods behind there. That's where all the woods start. It was uncleared. And all the horses were, I guess, within about 20 to 25 yards of one another, standing there in the front, all looking to the back. I pull up and the one horse is barbed wire on her and she's bleeding, which kind of surprised me because it was my best horse. It was the horse that I rode every day. And anybody who owns a horse understands that a horse can be like one of the best pets there are. She's not wild. So it was shocking to me that she was outside the fence. I started treating her, getting the barbed wire off, fixing the barbed wire, repaired everything, and didn't think anything of it and went home. Well, I remember that night before I went to sleep, I thought, the dog didn't even get out of the truck. And anybody that has a cow dog knows they like to work. And normally she's out getting it. And she never got out of the truck. So I thought, maybe she's getting old or not feeling, maybe I need to take her to the vet. So anyway, I go to sleep. The next morning, I woke up by my father saying, hey, let's go. The way it worked is I had leased some bulls and we did artificial insemination on certain cows. So my dad would mark the calendars of the prospective days for birth for calves. And so he was excited because hey, we got calves coming today. So he's waking me up. So we take off to go out to the property. I guess we got there about, sun was just coming up. And it was cold enough where you could see your breath. It was chilly. And so normally I would catch 2 horses and saddle them, and then we would go to the back or wherever the cows were and look for the new calves. But my one horse she got ripped up, so I wasn't going to mess with her. And the other ones, for some reason, were like borderline ferocious. They were just like not having it. They'd paw at you. And I just took it as, well, it's cold and they don't want to work. So my dad says, let's just walk. You're talking 1.5 miles to 2 miles to get to the back of it. It's a good ways. But we did it all the time. He liked to stalk and walk, and that was his thing. So we take off and we're walking across the pasture, the open part. And my dad says, do you notice that none of the cows are in the pasture? And I looked, and there was nothing. They were nowhere. So I said, they must be across the ravine up in those woods because it's chilly last night. And then he says, do you have your pistol? I said, yeah, I got my gun. And I always carried a 357 with me for just whatever. So we're crossing, and then we walk all the way across, still seeing nothing. And when we get to the ravine and we cross the ravine, on the other side of the ravine, we found about an 800-pound bull, young bull, dead, right on the edge of the ravine. Now, I say he was tore up, but it wasn't like Scarface ripped into shreds or anything. It wasn't like that. It's like kind of like whenever a bobcat or a cat kills something, they just rip at it. He had some rips at him. But this bull was a fighter. This bull he'd protect the herd. He was a pretty rank bull. So in looking, we saw there was canine tracks around there. And they were the biggest I've ever seen. I'm not saying they were giant like a basketball or nothing, but they were big. They were like the biggest dog you can think of. They were bigger than that. They were big. So I start calling the cows, thinking maybe somebody has some mastiffs or something, or I don't know. My dad, the whole time, he's saying nothing. He's not saying anything. He's just smoking cigarette after cigarette, not saying anything. And he just keeps looking at the back of the pasture, and he goes, all this land connects to the big woods. The big woods everybody knows about big woods. The Big Woods Cemetery is kind of famous, and it's a bunch of it's like lots of thick forest, and it goes almost all the way. You can get to Shreveport once you hit those woods. You can go all the way up to there. So there's a lot of big game has come out of there. I heard tell of giant deer being shot out of there. So I just think whatever. So we start walking south, going down the ravine, following the ravine on the opposite side where all the woods are. And I had cleared out a path, I guess about 25 yards wide, and the cows would walk that path. So that was their path. So we're walking that, and as we're walking, my dad says, don't stop calling and don't stop walking. He said, but look off to your left underneath those pine trees at the back of the back corner. This is something that we always would bring, if I was building fence or we were doing anything, we would always bring rifles, and we would keep them close, because I killed most of my deer because they're curious. Anybody that hunts knows a deer's curious, and if you're running equipment or if you're driving posts and they hear that noise, they'll come and look. We would always keep a gun close, and one of the things we would do is my dad would say, keep working, or he'd keep working, or he'd start fussing at me, like where his voice is talking, to keep it like we don't know. And then I would walk and get the gun. And so that was something that we always would do. So then he says, just keep calling the cows and keep walking, look off to your left. Underneath these pine trees is an area that I'd even had shot a deer there years before. It's a kind of a covered area, and the pine needles clear no grass grows underneath those trees there. And animals think that you can't see them because it's like in a shadow underneath there. So many times that we'd see deer and other animals up underneath there. And I looked off and I saw a very large canine, and it was black, which I've seen many, you don't really see wolves here. They're mainly like coyote mixes, or I've never seen one black. And it looked puffy. It looked puffy up in the front, like it had this thick winter coat, but it wasn't a coat. I think it was just an odd shape. I think you're used to seeing a wolf. A wolf is slender and long, but this thing was puffy up in the front, the top of the chest area, and a real big head. And it was just sitting there watching. So we kept walking, and then we go down to this other area, and it opens up. All the cows were right there. I'm talking 60 cows. If you've ever worked cows before and you put them in the pens, if you're trying to rope one or you're trying to catch one, man, they clump up super tight. Like just, you couldn't put a piece of paper in between them. They get so tight together. They pack up real tight, like for protection. And they were just all packed up super tight. There was like electric fence around them or something. It was really strange. They were all just standing there. So I look at my dad and I said, you think those wolves are hurting them like that or something? He just shook his head, no, kept smoking a cigarette. He said he just kept looking back and just wouldn't say nothing. So then I said, I screamed at the cows. Man, they looked up and saw me, and they got excited. It was like your kid at the mall that lost you. You know what I mean? They just took off. They ran right past us, crossed the ravine, and all the way up to the front. Just took off. Now, I didn't see anything at that point anywhere around them, so it didn't make any sense why they were standing like that. So we keep walking a little further south, and I look, I guess, 100 yards south further, and it looked about 9 foot, 10 foot high ahead. Now, the grass was tall back there, so I can't say I saw a body. So I don't know if, something was standing up or in a tree. I don't know. But I saw this massive head, and I remember that I could see the pupils at that far of a distance, which there's no way in the world you're going to be able to see the pupils of a wolf at 75 yards away. There's no way. I remember I could see that. And so I pulled out my pistol and I shot at it and eased down. And I remember my dad wasn't really mad at me, but he made the comment, do you have another bullet? And I said, yeah. He said, you better put it in there. And we started walking real fast. Then I remember I stopped back at the area where all the cows were corralled up, and I was looking at the fence, and by the fence, because I thought maybe they had broke the fence. And I remember he was like, we need to get out of here, acting. And I saw the tracks, and it looked like the tracks went from 4 to 2 when it got near the fence. So then I told him, I was like, damn, that wolf must have jumped, stood up and jumped over the fence. And he just shook his head, no. And he's, man, that's the big woods back there. I'm just thinking, what is that? What does that mean? So anyway, we take off walking. And as we're walking, I noticed he was like moving fast. And when I looked, I guess it was about 300 yards by now in that area where I had shot. The one I had saw, the head, eased off into that open way where I could see it. And it was big. I can't tell you exactly, but I know this. I know that I had looked at cattle from that distance my whole life. And it was equivalent to, say, a yearling, which, I mean, you're talking 800 pounds. It was huge. And then my dad said, they're flanking us. He said, we got to move. So we took off and we crossed and we went across. And the whole way we're walking, you need to call the livestock commission, which a friend of mine worked for the Calcasieu Parish Livestock Commission. He said, you need to call him. And he said, and we're going to call the game warden. He said, because we might need tags or something to get rid of these things. Also, there was three cows that were supposed to calve that night. And we could see that they had calved, but we never found the calves, ever. We saw they had calved, but we never found the calves, never found bodies, nothing. So something happened. They got those calves. So we called the game warden, and, I mean, he is there quick because they all knew my dad. I mean, we all grew up together. Livestock Commission and the game warden are there fast. I mean, within an hour and a half. They're out there. They're looking at the tracks. They're looking at everything. They said, these are wolves. They said, these are wolves, and they've migrated from Yellowstone. Whole time they're doing it, my dad's smoking, shaking his head, no. He's not saying nothing. He's just shaking his head, no. A couple times I heard him say that underneath his breath. So they said, we're going to put cages up, and we're going to catch them. And he said, you got 1 week. And if you don't get them in a week, I'm going to end them. So they said, oh, you can't do that. You know, they're protected. And he said, you got a week, 1 week. He said, y'all know me, you got a week. They put all these cages out, about 10 big live cages. Game wardens came every shift and checked those cages. Those cages were tore up. Never caught nothing. They finally come and get their cages and everything. I guess it was, my dad kept saying, he kept saying the big woods, the big woods, the big. He would always say that. When they came and got the cages and they left, my dad looked at me and he said, that's not no wolves. That's lougarou. I had no idea what that meant. I thought that was just like French for wolf or something. I didn't know. So now, one thing my dad would always do whenever he would hunt, we never would just like clean deer and just leave the organs out laying on the ground. He didn't do that. He would always burn stuff. And he would always take a chunk of meat and throw it out for the birds or whatever. And he said that was to guarantee good hunts and protect your herds. He would always say that. His grandpa talking about. You always got to burn it. You always got to burn it. Guess about a week later, I go to my fridge, my freezer. We butcher calves, so we always keep a lot of meat on hand. And I open up my freezer, and my freezer is totally empty. I'm talking nothing, everything gone. I'm pissed off. So I go to my dad, and I'm like, what'd you do to all my meat? And he said, what had to be done? That's all he said, what had to be done? So my father had been ill for years, and we never knew it. He wouldn't say much about that. And he had a massive stroke and got to where communication just like he was there, but he wasn't there kind of thing. Communication just wasn't good. One of the last things he told me is he said, when you find it, you burn it. And I was like, find what? Burn what? It didn't register. I was like, okay, sure, Dad, I'll do it. And I guess he was down a while and before he finally passed. And I remember it was like October 30th. It was the day before Halloween. I was out on the land, and I was out near the last pond in the very, very back, where I'm talking about where all the cows had been corralled up real tight. And I was back by that back pond, and I'm just sitting on the edge of the pond, and I looked into the pond, and there was a massive canine skull. I could see it now we always check the ponds because sometimes things die in the pond, and you don't want to mess your water up. Although our ponds are like artesian wells, they fill themselves up, but still you don't want rotten stuff in your pond. So we check them, and I saw this massive skull in there. So I had to walk off in the pond to get it, and I pulled it out of the pond, and this thing was big. I'm talking about the size of a young bull. It was big. And so as I'm walking back and coming back, I feel like this like crunching underneath my feet. And I look down at the edge of the water, and I look down at the water, and there's freaking paper everywhere. I'm like, what is all this crap? And I pull it up and I'm reading the paper and it says ribs, roast, steak, round steak. I was like, that's all my meat wrappers. So I pull out and I'm sitting on the edge there just thinking, what in the world is all this? And I look to the right and there's a little tallow tree beside the side of the pond. And underneath there is 2 5-gallon buckets of antifreeze. And on top of those buckets is syringes. Some of them still had antifreeze in them. So then I knew he took all my meat, came out here, injected all that meat with antifreeze. And that's how he got them. So I remember what he said about burn it. You got to burn it. You got to burn it. I pulled one of the tooth because I thought, I'm talking, that canine was 5-6 inches long, that tooth. It was huge. So I'm thinking, man, I might get rich. I might be able to sell this or something. I don't know. So I pulled this canine and I burned everything else like he said. And I don't know if this is coincidence. I don't know if this is what he was trying to tell me, because he would say that you would be cursed. But October 31st, my house burned and everything I owned in it. Now, that tooth ended up getting burned anyway. Coincidence? I don't know. But I know my dad was a stalker, and I know that he slayed the Dogman. Because I didn't know it was a Dogman until I started listening to you, and until me and you, James, had conversations, and you enlightened me on how they moved, and it all made sense, and my location, and that's my story.
Man, that's wild, dude. And the first time you told it to me, I was just like, wait, what? And then when I started hitting you with like little questions, not like hardcore questions, and you had the answers, I was like, yo, my man is telling the truth. This is crazy. You know what I'm saying? But I do have to hit you with 1 or 2 questions that are pertinent. And the reason why I'm going to ask you these questions is so nobody else down the line can come back and try and discredit what you're saying. So the first one I have to ask is, what was the time period between when your dad, you say when your dad actually injected the meat and then passed away, to the time period where you actually found the skull in the pond? Because what it signifies is that
I would say it was a couple of seasons. I would say it was a couple of seasons, because the paper was that kind of wax paper. You know what I'm talking about, where you wrap meat with, is that waxy kind of paper, and which that stuff lasts, and a lot of that paper was degraded pretty well. So I would say it was maybe 2 seasons, maybe 2 falls later, something like that.
gotcha, which is definitely long enough for it to actually to decay. And then the only other obvious question would be, because no one has ever had the opportunity to describe a skull, can you go give your best description of what that skull actually looked like? Just articulate it to the best of your ability, like dimensions, and just use your hand. The easiest thing for someone to understand would be the distance between your pinky and your thumb. That way they can actually look. How big was it? How long was it? How thick was it? Could you tell it was a snout? How long was the canine? Just touch bases on those kind of things real quick.
All right, I would say if I have, I would say maybe 10 or 12 inches wide, maybe 20 inches long. Canine probably 6 inches. Best way I can describe it, because is people with cow heads on their walls with the skulls and the cow head.
Right.
It was similar to that size, but a canine. I've seen many canine skulls. We've had to kill many wolves, many pests, many bobcats, and it was far larger than anything I had ever seen. No comparison, and never seen anything that big since. Nothing even close. I would say that if I spread my hands, that it was almost 2 wide. It's
That's
big,
freaking huge. Yeah, that's
close to
huge.
12 inches wide. I'd say it was really big. Now I didn't see any other bones. I didn't see like ribs, and I didn't see like the rest of the bones. Now, whether the pond drops off once you get it slopes, because we slope it for cows so they can walk down and get water if the water's low. But once you get to a certain point, it drops, and it's an artesian well, so we go all the way to the clay, and then we punch a hole. So it's pretty deep. Whether or not they were off in further in there, I don't know. I wasn't about to dive for it. To me, at this point in time, I didn't even know what it was. In my mind, a loup-garou was just a wolf, and this was just a big wolf at that time. It wasn't until we talked and you started explaining things to me, and I started putting it together, that I started thinking, whoa, wait a minute. This is another level. This is something different. There's a reason why I haven't seen. And I've seen wolves in Colorado. I've seen wolves in Alaska. I've seen wolves all over. I'm traveled. I've seen wolves everywhere, and I've never seen anything like this. And it was the shape was not right. That's the best way I can describe it, is the shape was just not right. The upper body, like I said, it looked like it had like a furry coat on over just the top part of his body. Now, but it wasn't cold enough for it to be like a thick winter coat or whatever. You know, like these old ladies, and they throw these minks over their shoulders, and it thickens up that top. That's how it looked. It looked like that across the top part of the body. Now, the second one, the big one, I can't tell you shape that well, because we didn't see it come out into the clearing until we were a good quarter ways into the pasture. So we were 300-400 yards away whenever we saw it. But I could tell by the size of it in comparison to seeing horses or cows or whatever at that distance thousands of times, that it was in that area of the same size.
Let me ask you this question for people who don't know. You described it as the size of a yearling. For people who don't know what a yearling is, like, you had to describe and explain that to me, and you were talking about 800 pounds. Let's just, because of your experience dealing with cattle, give a range for a yearling, what a yearling is, what's the maximum size they could be, and what's the maximum weight they could be, minimum weight they could be, so people can understand. Because when you're talking about 300 yards away, we're talking about 3 football fields away, you're talking about a significant amount of distance. Yeah. It would have to be a huge animal for you to even, you know what I'm saying?
Because at that distance, whenever we would see deer, they looked like they were little, small. Yeah, yearly, whenever a calf is born, normally for our calves, they averaged about 118 pounds on average, something like that. And then they stay on the mama for X amount of months, according to how quickly you can get them away sometimes. And then they wean off the mom. And then you usually start transferring them to some type of feed, or putting them in a pasture where you planted some type of grass or something for them. And then they eat that for a while. And then the yearling is about at a year mark. And normally they can be 800 to, and that's not super heavy. I'm just being modest in overall, 800 to up to 1,000 pounds, some of them, depending on I didn't have big size cattle. I bred mid-sized cattle because they were easier keepers. They didn't need as much grass to stay fat. So I didn't have the real big giant cattle. I always went with a mid-sized cow. I'd say 800 to 1,100 pounds would be the average. At least it was for me. That was our average for about at a year mark. And he was a bull that was killed. Now, there was numerous calves that were killed and lost, and this was an ongoing thing. That's just this particular event. We had lost multiple calves up to this point. It was a problem. It was a problem. And whenever I say that the traffic of the animals stopped, I'm talking about to nothing. Absolutely nothing. And whenever the animals stopped moving the pipeline, I assumed it was the ice storm. They have no other means of path. They have no other means of travel. So how are they going to get from big woods to the river if they're not traveling the pipeline? They're not going to walk down the interstate. They're not going to walk down the highway. They're not going to walk through people's backyards. That's the only means of travel. So for that amount of animals to be shut off, it was a serious red flag of something was going on. Now, I've had the rabbits disappear because of bobcats, or that's happened. A predator comes, things change. That had happened in the past. We had bobcat problems before, and we noticed the difference in things, but never the large animals stopped to that point. Never.
And were you able to correlate the lack of, or the game going missing with the time period in which your calves started going missing? Was it like the game went missing and then my calves came up missing, and when the game was around, my calves were fine? Was there any correlation that you were able to make looking back on it now? Because you probably weren't thinking about that then, but looking back on it now, was there any correlation between the two?
Absolutely. It was all in that same time frame. Because I remember, you know how like for instance, we just dealt with Laura. So now everything is compared to, man, since Laura. I remember in that time frame, everything I would say would be, man, that ice storm. That was the first time we got really shut down on lockdown for 4 or 5 days. I had cattle freeze. It was the first of that. That was before Katrina and Rita, before all that had come. You just blamed everything on that. But yeah, it was the same time frame. It was about the same time frame, and it was progressive. Because before that, you would walk out into the pasture and the cows would be in the pasture, which normally your cows are going to be out in the open spot where the good grass is, where the food is. And sometimes that area that I was talking about underneath those pine trees, sometimes something would be laying up around in that area, and usually deer would be there. And a lot of times, whenever out in the field, your cows would be out in the field, the deer would intermingle with them. You'd be walking across the pasture and you'd say, looks like there's about 4 or 5 calves with that one cow. And then you would get close and you would see it was the deer. The deer would just get in there and eat with the cows. Not odd at all. But that stopped to the point of no deer. Nothing.
Yeah, that's crazy. No, the reason why I asked that question is because when I do my interviews, I'm going to ask the questions that naturally someone would ask, so they don't need to be answered later on. And that way you don't have to worry about people coming back. And the one thing that stood out to me, and I just want to get your thoughts on it, because I don't know if you're not sure if your dad actually explained this to you, but when he talked about the game warden, he told you may have to get tags to remove these things. What was your thoughts about tags? What did he mean by that? Were you thinking he was implying that they knew what it was, and that because you told me that they said that they were protected species when it came to trapping them? Do you think they knew what it was, and your dad knew that, okay, I can't just roll out here and kill these things, I might get in trouble? And I guess that would be from that conversation.
Yes, he did know that. That's because he said that. He said wolves are protected. He said there might have to be. If an animal is a nuisance and it's killing your cattle, of course you have rights. And I think what he was referring to is, I don't even know if there is an actual tag. That's what he said. I don't know if he was meaning like I may have to get permission to take care of these things. But he specifically told the game warden, you have a week or I'm going to end them. And they knew he meant it.
Yeah, and so after that, they just didn't come back, or they just let it ride? The game
After that, they didn't come back, no. No, they didn't. They didn't. But the game warden, like I said, I grew up in church with the guy. My dad used to take us fishing as kids. He's known my dad his whole life, and he knew as cattlemen that we had rights to do what we needed to do. But I don't really know enough about the rules. I know that we tried to follow the rules and call all the appropriate people, called the livestock commission and had them come and look at the bull to show them what had happened, showed them all the tracks. and they frequented the property regularly for that week. And I know that not every one of those cages, but I know that the traps were torn to shreds. I know that.
If you had to describe the trap
said.
that was used, if you had to describe the cage or trap, let me describe that, because people, I can't imagine the size of what we're talking about. Kind of give somebody a reference to the size of the trap, dimensions, length, width, and height, because I think that's significant as to what they knew. It gives you an idea of what the game warden knew and understand, because it's not like they went out there with a 3-foot long trap, right?
Yeah, it looked more like a trap, like you were trying to trap like multiple pigs. Like a trap if you were trying to catch, like, hey, I have a pig problem and I'm not sure how many of them I have. They were like that. You're talking about if you were on the back of an 18-wheeler, maybe 4 could fit on it, on the bed. They were big. They were big enough to where I think you could probably catch 6 pretty large pigs. And I'm talking when pigs get big. So yeah, they were big. They were big. And I think that they also were that size because they maybe didn't know how many there were. And my dad said, if we saw, now the first one, no way did it know we saw it. It didn't know we saw it. The second one knows we saw it because it shot at it. I don't think it would have known that we saw it. You're talking about a different level of senses whenever it's your property and you're out there every day and you walk the same path and your cows are out there. If something's out of place, if the limb breaks in a tree, we would notice. It's definitely a heightened level of awareness as compared to somebody else just walking through the woods out there. Especially with my father, he was a stalker. He would stalk animals. He would go to Colorado hunting with all my uncles, and he would shoot his tags and theirs because they couldn't get anything. So then they would end up giving him their tag, and he'd shoot their tag too. And they're in stands, and he's walking. So I wish I could have picked up more of his skill set. I think that I'm former military, and I think I'm pretty good at it in comparison to him. Nowhere in the same ballpark.
No, I understand. The last and final question that I can think of that anyone would ever try and poke a hole into. I'm glad you disclosed the former military. I was going to get into that. What about, so we have these game wardens on the property. What kind of behaviors were you able to observe from them? Like, how did they behave when they were there? Were they behaving like they were frightening? Were they armed? What was their behavior like when it came as far as them being on the property?
I believe I would say that they were nonchalant until they saw the tracks. It was just, I don't think that they didn't come out there all serious like a SWAT team. They came out there, I believe, mainly out of respect to my father, and because we were friends. I think they came out there out of respect, and I don't think, no, they weren't like armed to the T or freaking out until they saw the tracks. Once they saw the tracks, they got a lot more serious. They got very serious. And he said it was wolves and that they migrated from Yellowstone. And he said they've migrated all the way to Mexico. And my dad shook his head no and said, that's like that, kind of under his breath. And he didn't say lougarou until they left with the cages and didn't have anything. That's whenever he told me, that's not no wolves, that's lougarou. And I thought that, oh, that's like a different kind of wolf or something. That's like a bigger, like you have a mastiff and then you have a Napoleonic mastiff or whatever. You have different strands or breeds or bigger. I thought it was just like another word for big ass wolf. I didn't. he didn't act like it was some type of mystical thing. It was just, he was very nonchalant about it. My father was very serious about it, but I don't know if he'd ever encountered anything like this before. I don't know. I mean, he was just the kind of guy that would light one cigarette off the next and shake his head no. I don't know. I really don't know, but I know that I've never seen anything like it since, and I know that he got rid of them quite ingeniously.
I think the last and final question, and this question, depending on how you answer this question and how much you disclose, is going to depend on what little small portion of the interview I chop out. There will be if I hear something that I know will cause a problem for you personally, I'm always going to cut it out. But do you still own the property, and have you been back since your, wait, let me pause. Let me go back one more question, two questions. Did you ever discover
Sure.
what caused the fire itself?
No.
And then the final question.
Inconclusive.
And the final question would be, do you still own the property? Have you been back to the property? Do you even go back to the property? Like, what happened to the cattle? What happened to the horses? How did that all conclude for you after this experience? Because that's one of the most significant things for people to understand. When something really bad happens, there's always a consequence, and there's always something that shifts off course.
I no longer have cattle or horses, and I've never set foot on that property again.
And that's directly correlated to the experience, or is it like the experience, or is it your dad dying? Is it you moved in a different direction? How did that how did that play out for you to make that decision?
I'd say partially because of him passing and because it was our thing, partially because of that, and partially because, James, I really don't know why, but I can't really tell you why, but I haven't set foot on that property again. And I really don't think I have any intentions to.
No, I understand.
I'm not saying I'm scared. I'm not saying I'm afraid. It's just, I really don't have an answer for that, James.
No, I completely understand. I understand where you're coming from with that. Because psychologically, it's something that you and your dad did together. And probably going back to that, you have to relive all those memories. And then you combine that with what the encounter and the experience is. For most people, it's a very tough thing. Just to relive an encounter with something creepy and weird. But then you combine death associated with that, and you and your father having a good relationship. It's definitely a tough thing. It definitely is a tough thing. I tell you what,
I also don't hunt anymore either.
Oh, really?
No, I do not.
That's really significant because a lot of people who have an understanding of what's really there, they don't hunt anymore either. You would literally have to force, it would have to be, okay, society's collapsing, I need food, I'm going into the woods. A lot of people, they give them woods up, man. Once they realize that they're not the alpha predator, they give it up, which is a significant thing for an outdoorsman because that is solace and peace for most people. And to give that up means a lot. You know what I'm saying? We're right at the time limit. I want to give you an opportunity, based on your experience, just to speak about anything as it pertains to Dogman from what you've seen, any lessons you want to leave people, any points you want to get across to people, anything, because completely wide open. Whatever the hell you want to say, go ahead and say it now, and then we'll wrap it up.
I don't really think I have anything, James. I don't think I have any words of wisdom, or all I have is what I experienced and what I know from it, which is really not much until, me and you started kicking it, talking about it, and you started explaining things to me. It helped me connect the dots on some things to where I had a better understanding as to how they came there, why they came there, what the roots were. You explained the cattle, why the cattle were all crowded together like that. It's just a lot of things. Actually, I guess the only thing I would have to say is that Dark Waters is for real. That's about all I got to say.
Nah, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that more than you because I put a lot of time and energy into it, and I don't just talk to you once. I leave these long gaps just to make sure everything is what it is. And it's necessary because in this environment, everybody wants attention and they want to be popular and they want to be. That's the thing that I thought was very significant about you, because when we talked, you said, man, I don't give a if you tell a story or not. He's like, I don't give a if people believe me or not. Until just recently when I said, hey, man, can I do the story? He was like, I want to do it to honor my dad. And I was like, okay, I'm going to drop everything I'm doing. And like I told you, when I'm done with this, it will definitely be presented in a way that you will be proud. I mean, it really will be, because that's the significance of what I do. When I tell a person's story, I'm aware there's a person on the other side of it that can hold me accountable to what I'm saying and what I'm doing, and I encourage them to hold me accountable if I tell anything that's not true. I say, hey man, if you hear me say anything that you didn't share with me, or if you hear me add anything to your story, not subtract, but add anything to your story, then you call me out on it. And I haven't been called out once, because I really take it personally, because you guys are people that I talk to and I get to know. So I just want to thank you for taking time to share your experience and being brave enough to do it. I am going to use some of your music when it comes to this encounter, which I really love. It's dope, and we're going to get it done, man. We're going to definitely get it done, and I'll make sure that if you send me some links to the songs or wherever it needs to go, I'll put it to where people can find it, and I'll promote it. And then again, I just want to thank you, buddy.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you.
All right.